So, it's been a while. Why did it take me so long? I was writing my bachelor's thesis and I did not want to be writing a video script at the same time. That's too much writing. So I have hosted 30 multi-animator projects over the years, and from my experience of doing that, I have gathered quite a bit of information that might be helpful for someone who is either just starting out or otherwise struggling with hosting maps. This is a remake of a video I made in 2017. While the other do's and don'ts video was relatively similar to the old version, in this one I have shaken up the formula a bit to make the video easier to comprehend. I should also mention that while you don't have to have seen the do's and don'ts of joining maps video to watch this one, this video is aimed at people who already know how maps, aka multi-animator projects, work, so if you don't, then check out that other video instead. I explain everything there. Without further ado, let's get into the do's and don'ts of hosting maps. Let's start out with what you should and shouldn't do before posting your map call. Do not start your project impulsively. Before hosting a map, you need to understand that it's a huge commitment. When you're a map participant, if you lose motivation, you can just be replaced, but when you're the host, you have the responsibility to keep the project afloat. If you lose motivation, then that means letting down everyone who worked on your project. It could and usually does mean the end of the map. Which is why you should plan your project carefully before posting the map call. I usually have the idea for a project in my head for half a year or more before ever even starting to think about actually making it. A lot of the planning phase is something that's individual to each host and involves a lot of creativity, but I'll be getting into some of the things that go into the planning phase later in this section. I also consider making sure that you have the time and energy to host the map as part of the planning process. I don't host maps if I know I'm going to be very busy or if I don't feel especially motivated to do so. While I consider hosting maps to be incredibly rewarding, it is often taxing as well. Participants are going to miss the deadline, drop out, ghost you, or it might take a long time to find any participants at all. I approached the idea of hosting a map by asking myself the question, if worst came to worst, would I be willing to finish every remaining part in the map, whether it was 2 parts or 20? If yes, then I am very likely motivated enough to go ahead with the idea. Use your own judgment here. You know yourself better than me. Once you have an idea, don't go ahead with making the map call before checking for problems. Problems like, is someone already making the same project as you? It happens. People get similar ideas all the time. You might also want to check if the song is going to get the map call blocked worldwide on YouTube or something. Do this before you put too much work into the map call so that you don't waste your time. Some things you can't check in advance, or things might slip through, so if there still ends up being problems, then resolve them. Like if you find out after already making your map call that someone else was doing a similar project after all, then try working things out with the host of that map if you can. Communication is key. If your projects aren't too similar, then they might be able to coexist. Or if the song got the video blocked, try using a cover of the song or switching to a different song altogether. Do not use terminology that your intended pool of possible participants doesn't know. This might require a bit of explanation. Multi-animator projects are more common in some communities than in others, and depending on what community you expect the participants for your map to surface from, you might want to consider which term for this type of project you want to use. The most common ones I have seen are map, multi-animator project, map project, animator collab, and in specific cases, reanimated project. Something like the Warrior Cats community or the OC map community is likely going to be the most familiar with the terms map and multi-animator project, out of which map is the shorter one, so it fits nicely into YouTube titles. In this case, using a term like animator collab might be confusing for possible participants. They might think that the project is somehow different from a map, since you're using a different term. On the other hand, if you're trying to host a map in a community that isn't familiar with the acronym, then you might end up with hundreds of very original comments saying, "Oh, haha, I thought you meant the other kind of map." So, try using a term that is conventionally used by your intended audience. If there are previous similar projects that have been hosted in the same community, then see what terms they are using and copy that term to your project. This is especially important when you're making your first project, because at this point you're likely going to be struggling to find participants, so you don't want to accidentally turn any of them away from your project by using a weird term. If you don't struggle with finding participants, then in that case, you can pretty much just use whatever term you like the most. Since we're kind of on the topic of finding participants, now is probably a good time to mention that especially for your first project, you're likely going to struggle with finding any. So don't go with an obscure concept for your first project. If your first map is like, please come animate my OCs that you've never heard of, or please come animate any character you want to this song that no one knows except for me, then that's going to make finding participants much more difficult than it needs to be. People do successfully make maps with their OCs, and people do get quite creative with their project ideas, but that's usually done at the point where you already have some kind of an established audience. When you don't have that, you are relying on people finding the concept of your map interesting enough to join. So for your first project, make your project interesting to possible participants. My first ever successful map was an Ashfur Warrior Cats map to the song This Day Area from My Little Pony. I picked that song because I saw that in the Warrior Cats community, My Little Pony crossover maps were popular at the time. This Day Area in particular was a beloved and well-known song, and Ashfur was a popular character. So then, even with my lacking art skills and itty-bitty audience, I was able to complete my first map. You don't need to do exactly as I did, but just consider whether your idea would be interesting to animators. If your map is going to have set character designs you're making yourself, then don't make the character designs too hard to draw. This is especially true if you're doing a fully animated map instead of a PNG map, since overcomplicated character designs are going to increase everyone's workflow. They can also easily turn people away from your map entirely. Instead, pick character designs that fit your project. Make them a little simpler if it's a fully animated map, and a little more complicated if it's a PNG map. Additionally, you might want to consider whether they fit the tone of the map, if the characters are easily recognizable from one another, and if the character designs fit together well. I sometimes see people use a mixture of character designs that they've made themselves and then some character designs made by others, and this works as long as the designs still look approximately similar. But sometimes it's super obvious that the designs weren't made with the intention of looking good together, and that can be a little jarring. Don't put the deadline too far or too close. This is once again something that depends on the type of project, but generally speaking, if you give people too much time to do their part, then they're going to put it off to work on other projects before yours, and might end up forgetting to make the part altogether. If you put the deadline too close, then that's obviously going to lower the quality of the parts, but it might also make some people not want to join since they know they won't have the time. Adjust the deadline based on the project you're making. If you're just looking for a short little PNG part, or if it's like a shitpost map, then you can safely have the deadline closer. If the map has long parts and you're expecting a lot of really complex animation, then consider putting the deadline a bit further away. I usually go for 1 or 2 months for my more serious maps, but a lot of hosts put the deadline much further away than that. Speaking of part length, don't make the parts too long or too short. Parts that are very long will obviously put more strain on a singular participant, so they take longer to finish their parts if they can finish them at all, whereas parts that are overly short might make the project harder to follow. I typically try going for parts that are about 7 seconds long. Obviously I adjust them to the music, but that's the length I aim for. However, not all the parts need to be the same length. If you're doing a scripted map, then consider giving more time to parts that need to convey a lot of important information, or splitting those parts into 2 parts, especially if they need to convey something that's very complex. Parts that are meant to have something simple going on, like a character singing a lyric, can often get away with being shorter because the information they're conveying is easier to grasp. Even if it isn't a scripted map, you can and you should change the duration of the parts in accordance to the tempo of the song. If you make your parts longer, then that will likely make them a bit slower paced, whereas short parts will make the pace faster. Don't make your rules too long. This might sound counterintuitive, like, should I not include absolutely everything in the rules to make sure that people know what they're meant to do? To which I would say, oh sweet summer child, people are not going to read the rules. Which is to say that people especially are not going to read the rules if they're just a block of text, most of which is information that's obvious to them anyways. They're gonna skim over it and see that, oh yeah, I already know most of this stuff, and then they're not going to read the rest of it. And you might be saying, oh well, then I just won't let the people who haven't read all the rules into my map. Likely, you won't have a choice, because a lot of people don't read the rules, and also you won't know if they have read them. Of course, the participants should read the rules, but it is also your responsibility as the host to make the rules clear and concise. Do you need to mention that tracing isn't allowed? Aren't the participants going to know that already? Do you need to mention that you're looking for animators with more experience? Well, you can if there's space in the rules, but at the end of the day, you're just going to pick the participants you want anyways. Make sure that the crucial information, like deadlines, are not drowned out by a bunch of stuff that isn't as important or is extremely obvious. Now that that's done, let's get into what you should and shouldn't do when assigning participants. Don't turn people away too easily. If you have trouble finding participants, which, as I have said before, you likely will if it's your first map, then you can't be as picky with the participants as you would possibly like to be. Instead, adjust your pickiness based on the people trying to join. If you're getting very few people asking for parts, then you might want to let in almost anybody, but if there's a lot of people, then you can probably afford being a little pickier. Don't fall into despair if the parts don't get filled right away. While the parts in my maps and those of other people who have been doing this for a long time tend to get filled quickly, it is possible that you'll have parts open for a while. That should be alright though, since when people finish parts for your project, then that's going to double as free advertising for your map and most likely bring at least a few new people in. If you're having trouble finding participants, then try advertising your map where you're allowed to do so. If you've taken part in maps before, which I hope you have since you're trying to host your own, then those might have Discord servers with specific channels that are for advertising your own projects. You can also pop an advertisement into the comment section of the do's and don'ts of joining maps video that I made, but just don't go to random comment sections to advertise your map. Now, if this is your first project, then you're not going to have the same problems as me, but I also do want to share my methods for people like me who are dealing with hundreds of people trying to get into your map. If this is not you, then you can just skip to the next section since it's not going to be very important for you. But while getting a lot of applications is obviously really great, it can also be extremely time-consuming going through all of them, and I want to help. Hear me out. Don't make people ask for parts in the comments section. Again, this is usually perfectly fine if you only have a few people applying, but the second there's any more, it becomes a problem. Someone puts a link to their animation example in the comment. Whoops, that's auto-filtered now. You try to tell someone they got a part. Uh-oh, YouTube didn't send them the notification. Now they don't know that they got a part. Accidentally clicked on a link? Good luck scrolling back to the bottom of the page to find the application you were reading. Use Google Forms for applications. Save yourself from the unnecessary suffering of trying to navigate a YouTube comment section. YouTube sucks! But if you have a lot of applications, you might find that it's still difficult to get through them all. You could ask someone for help, but I usually don't, so I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks. The do's and don'ts formula is going on the shelf for a little bit so that I can share my overly elaborate part assigning process. Step 1. Read the form. So we're starting with the first form, checking that everything's okay here and there's no missing information. If there's missing information, you can just skip to the next form. Proceed to step 2. Watch the animation example. So then you're going to want to open the animation example in a new tab, then evaluate it. Is it good enough? Would you let this person in your map? If no, next form. If yes, proceed to step 3. Put the participant on the list. Trademark. Grab the form number of the participant and put them on the list under the parts that they have asked for. If they asked for any part, then put them under the any part title. Step 4. Repeat steps 1 to 3 until you've gone over all the forms. This method is fast, but if you have many applications, it's still going to take a while. Step 5. Order the any part people from best to worst. All of them are obviously very good to be on the list. Trademark. In the first place, but this needs to be done. Simply open their animation examples on a bazillion tabs and then order them based on skill. Once you're done, close all the examples except the very top one or few of the top ones. Step 6. Pick a part and open the animation examples of all of the people you have on the list there and then pick the best one. That person receives the part. The top any part people are also a part of this consideration. Do not go through the parts chronologically, meaning from part 1 to the last part. No! If you do that, then the animation quality is going to drop towards the end of the project, or you might end up with the very last parts not filled at all. Instead, start with either a part that's very important, very challenging, or very unpopular. This way, you're not going to run out of participants at the worst possible moment. You might also have different criteria for different parts, and that's good as well. Step 7. Then delete the person who received the part from all the other points on the list. Trademark. If it was an AnyPart asker, then open the animation example of a new AnyPart asker from down the list. Step 8. Close all the animation example tabs except for the AnyPart askers. Step 9. Repeat steps 6 to 8 until you've gone through all the parts. Step 10. Congrats! You are done assigning parts. I swear, this is the most optimized way I have been able to come up with. Feel free to steal. Okay, back to the do's and don'ts. Here's what you should and shouldn't do when the map is in process. You filled your map? Or maybe you're still waiting for it to be filled, but you already have people working on their parts? Awesome! Excellent! As a host, I would consider that you've already made it past the hardest part. But you're not out of the woods quite yet. Do not ghost your participants. Do not be a ghost host. If you just disappear from existence and only come back to remind people of their deadlines on the day of the deadline, then that's not good for morale, and it might also lead to people forgetting about the deadline. You're the director! Act like it! Comment on people's work in progresses! Correct them if needed! Answer questions! And remind people about deadlines before the actual deadline. Multiple times! To make communicating with your participants a bit easier, consider setting up a Discord server. With all your participants in the same place, it'll be far easier to communicate than by using direct messages or, God forbid, YouTube comment sections as your platform of communication. Additionally, Discord servers allow participants to help each other and possibly adjust their parts to better match one another. Do remember though that not everyone has a Discord account, especially since Discord is 13+, so especially if you struggle with finding participants, it might be for the best to have some alternative communication method for any participant that doesn't have a Discord. And consider carefully whether you want to allow observers in the server, since it can make the space a little cluttered or even expose the server to vandalism. In this case, you might want to have moderators, just saying. Don't leave downloading parts for last. When people start finishing their parts, you might feel tempted to wait until all the parts are done before downloading them. Don't do this! If someone gives you a SendSpace link, it might expire. Google Drive links can have issues. YouTube videos can be made private. And sometimes the participant might disappear during the time it takes to finish the map entirely. This doesn't always mean that they didn't want their part in the map. People usually ask to take their part of the project if that's what they want. Sometimes people just forget that you need to have continued access to the part. Download the parts as they're made. Someone finished their part? Snatch that up! Store it in your deepest, darkest vault. Make sure it's somewhere where you can find it. I personally recommend Google Drive for sharing links, but whatever works for you, works for you. Just keep in mind that sometimes illegally downloading parts from YouTube can lower the quality, and that's not good. So preferably do not do that. Don't be antagonistic towards your participants. I have honestly never had an experience with this happening, but generally speaking, you don't want to be like a tyrannical leader. At the end of the day, maps are a hobby and you can't expect everyone to attend weekly afternoon meetings, and it usually can't be realistically expected that everyone will finish their parts in time or at all. You need to realize that and adjust to this fact. Have some backups. But at the same time, kick people out of the project if necessary. This can be a hard pill to swallow. I think that these days I may be a little too nice. But you need to remember that a participant who struggles to finish their part but doesn't ask for help is not just holding up the map to the detriment of you, but also the other participants. They want to see the map finished as much as you do, and by being too nice to someone who has continuously missed deadlines, you are letting down the other participants as well. You can be strict without being mean, and when it comes to trying to keep together a project of 30-ish internet hobbyists of all ages, you probably should be at least a little strict, or else it's going to all fall apart. Alright, as for the final portion of this video, here's what you should and shouldn't do when the parts are all done. That's awesome if you got this far. That's already better than most maps out there, I'm pretty sure. But your work obviously is not done yet, and while there are only few things that can go wrong at this point, I'm still going to mention them just to be safe. Don't put off the editing process for too long. Once all the parts are done, the participants are going to be looking forward to the finished project. The editing itself probably won't take very long, but if there's something else you need to finish, like an end credit sequence or something else that requires more time, consider starting and making that before all the parts are in so that you won't be holding up your own project. If something comes up so that you can't edit the project yourself, like computer problems, then just hand it to be edited by someone else. But also, do the editing carefully. Make sure all the parts are correctly synced to the music, that they're all in the right place, that you didn't, for example, accidentally swap two parts, that you have the most recent versions of the parts in case some participants have remade them or adjusted them, that there's no empty frames, etc. Something that I like to do is send the completed project to the participants before uploading it so that they can check for any mistakes that weren't obvious to me as well. Related to this point, don't forgo crediting your participants. Seriously. There are a few ways you can credit your participants, such as with watermarks, with a credit sequence, with timestamps, with links in the description, etc. I would advise that you do several of these. Definitely do not rely on, for example, only timestamps or captions or other YouTube features, because YouTube kind of has this thing that it does, where it occasionally gets rid of previous features. Remember the credits feature with updating channel names? So when you use only that for the crediting, and then they get rid of that feature, you're left with a map that has no credits, and it's been so long since you made that map that you don't even have access to that information anymore. Thanks YouTube, but also I probably should not have relied on YouTube in the first place. Don't you do that either. Also, check that the participant names are still the same. Sometimes people might change the name of their YouTube account, and if you have a Discord server, then they might inform you of the change there, but they might also not, so it's in your best interest to make sure that everyone still goes by the same name that they did when they first joined the map. And finally, once the map is uploaded, don't delete the map. Generally speaking, just make sure the final project is safe for the participants to see. If not on your channel, then somewhere else. Everyone worked hard on it, and now it's your job to keep it safe and available. Something icky slipped past you into the final map, and now you're getting in trouble for it? Well, you could try to re-edit the map if it's something that you can fix easily, just don't delete. It is your responsibility to keep the map available so that the participants can point at it and say, look, I took part in that. On a related note, defend the honor of your participants. If you get comments that say, part 24 is so much worse than all the other parts, smite them. Commentitus, deletus, blocked from channel, yeetus. And if the participants remain in the Discord server, then consider sending them some nice comments people have. This is optional, of course, but it might be nice. Make sure that they know that they're appreciated for their hard work. Alright, that is all the points on hosting maps. Please remember that I am just a singular map host, and while I have a lot of experience, other hosts might have different ways of doing things and different opinions as well. I have likely been a little out of touch with the new to making maps experience for a while now, and there might be challenges out there that weren't present in my day when I was just starting out. I also have zero experience with hosting maps on other platforms like elonmusk.com, so if you're a map host and you think I missed something crucial, please feel free to add that in the comments down below. Or if this video left you with any questions, you can ask me those there as well. At the end of the day, even with how frustrating they can sometimes be, I still think hosting a map is definitely a super valuable learning experience and very rewarding as well. If you've watched this far, well, I wish you good luck on your map hosting adventure. Bye!